Hello, I'm Nadine Wright, Racial Justice Officer for the Diocese of Chester, and I will be taking you through this unconscious bias training today. I sincerely hope that by the end of the course you will have gained understanding about unconscious bias, in particular in regards to the fact that we all have unconscious bias, that we recognise the danger that unconscious bias becomes unwarranted prejudice, and that any bias based on colour, disability, age, social status, or gender is unacceptable because we are all fearfully and wonderfully made and are made in the image of God. Okay, so I want you to have a think. I want you to think about how you would describe your next vicar, who you're envisaging in your mind. I then want you to take a look at the images on this slide. Who is a vicar? So we've got lots of different people here in our pictures and our images, and we can see a lot of different variety. Do any of the people that you see in the images fit into the person that you imagined would be your next vicar? How realistic do you think it would be for your next vicar to look like any of these people in the images? What we will cover in this training, so we'll look firstly at why we're doing training on unconscious bias. Then we are going to look at what unconscious bias is. Then we will look at what the impact of unconscious bias is. And finally, what we can do to minimize the negative impact of unconscious bias. Okay, so the first question that we're looking at is, why are we learning about unconscious bias? Well, there's plenty of reasons why, but principally it's because we aspire to be a church that is welcoming to all and accepting of all. Jesus loved the world in all of its diversity, and so should we. St. Paul wrote that there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ. Therefore, it should be one of our missions to be accepting and welcoming of a variety of people. So there are two words we perhaps need to be very clear about. The first one being diversity, and the second being inclusion. So we've got two starting sentences: diversity is and inclusion is. So what I would like you to do is to attempt to finish these starting sentences, and I will give you 2 minutes to answer this question, or more if you need, so feel free to pause at this point. So what is diversity? Diversity is a given. It means that we cannot change what God has given to us naturally. So the colour of our skin, our genders, abilities/disabilities. It's the way that we are, and we should be appreciative of how God has created variety. And we should be as open and as inclusive to as many people as possible. So being inclusive is a choice. We make a conscious choice as to whether we include or exclude people from what we do. Inclusion is making the numbers count, because we can choose to use people, encourage people, and embrace the gifts that they have. Diversity is counting the numbers, because we simply describe the reality we have in our churches. So we're going to look at a video produced by the Church of England a few years ago, and it expresses well what it feels like to be excluded on the basis of your colour.
I regard myself as a cradle Anglican. I was born and baptized into the church at 6 months old, so I've known no other church. This is my church. I grew up in the Caribbean, seeing reflections of myself in leadership within the church, within society as a whole. And then I came to England in 1979 as a teenager. And I looked around me and I couldn't see reflections of myself in leadership within the Church of England.
It's hard to describe to someone who is used to being the majority culture what it's like walking into a church and feeling like you're the only one. It's just a very hard feeling to capture, and I guess minorities from every ethnic group just learn to deal with that.
If you don't see yourself, then you don't know that you are welcomed, that you can be part of.
And so even though the church itself can be saying with words, you belong, you're welcome, everything about the situation communicates to you, I'm not part of this and I'm not welcome.
Well, CMIAC's been around for almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years next year in 2016. And throughout that time, it's assisted the Church of England with work around minority ethnic Anglican concerns. But the fact that we're still 30 years on and talking about the same things, I think that's the challenge for us, really.
For people to feel that the church is for them, they want to be able to see that they are welcomed in, not just by words, but by actions. And actually, one of the ways that happens is as people see leaders of similar skin colour, ethnicity to them, in positions of leadership saying, come in, this is for you.
Wherever there's a formal structure, whether there's a hierarchy, barriers will exist. Now, they can be intentional or unintentional. I think the challenge is that we've got to try and recognise what those barriers are, and we need to do everything in our powers to remove them.
I think it's okay to feel prejudiced or to have these thoughts, but I think one needs to be prepared to confront it and talk about it and make the changes.
And I remember in a rural deanery saying to them, what if you had a vacancy and I applied for it? Would you consider me? And this dear elderly church warden said, we have no black people here, so why would we want to appoint you in a position like this?
For I myself have struggled, actually, even though I have got lots of gifts that can be used outside my church. It has taken a very long time for me to get involved. It wasn't that I didn't have the gift. I was just not the right colour, which is very hard to say, but that's true.
We're all uniquely gifted by God. And so if there are a group of people who aren't coming into the Church of England, that is to the detriment of the whole, because God has made each individual special and unique and with particular gifts that are useful in the service of his kingdom. And so if there's a whole group of people who we're neglecting to reach, well, then we're in big trouble, because God has gifted those people for a purpose, and we want to be part of the blessing that he wants to give to his people.
When one gets across those kind of differences, there's so much that actually connects, and there's so much richness which is being lost.
My name is Shay Prince. I got baptised and confirmed 3 years ago into the Church of England. It is important to have black people as a leader because it gives people more hope to be like, okay, I want to be like this person, I can do this.
A few years ago, I met a young man, 25 years old, same ethnicity as me, and he'd just become a Christian. So although he was welcomed in by me and others, in practice he felt like this was a place that wasn't for him. He saw the lack of familiar faces, if you like, within the Church of England and thought that this wasn't a place that really welcomed him, and so he went elsewhere.
So it seems to me that even at a clerical level, we're not getting the clergy who have black people in their churches, encouraging them to offer themselves for ministry.
The thing that most encouraged me to go into ministry were those people who came alongside me and said, you may not feel like this is for you, but let me encourage you. You have the gifts and the potential, and even though maybe you don't see people like yourself here, this could be you. And I think we need more of that, more people who would just get alongside young people who are just at the process of beginning to think these things through.
When I spoke in my maiden speech in July 2011, I said that we didn't know what to call it unfinished business. We ought to actually call it business barely started. And I think we've moved on from that point now. we're in a positive place, but the challenge really is for us to progress it.
As a church, we cannot be telling those across the road in Parliament to do this and do the other if we don't get our own house in order. And so it's a great challenge for the church.
What I want to get across, I suppose, is that it's not about just being nice and welcoming. I think people are. But I think it's to go beyond that, to actually, really taking steps to include, to nurture, to have opportunities for people from other backgrounds coming in.
That starts just with the words that we use, but I think it has to go further than that, so that when I do walk into the church, I do see a leadership that begins to represent the wealth of diversity and gifts that we have in this country.
I think that gives a very good picture to the diverse world that we live in, that there is unity in Jesus Christ, which I think is an attractive thing for people, for young people.
And one of the things said about the first Christians in the Acts of the Apostles was, see how they love one another. Now that love needs to be shown in action.
And so for me, the future of the Church of England looks like a church that says we need to remain faithful to the Scriptures, faithful to Christ, but how do we change for the sake of the kingdom of God? How do we include the people who aren't being included? So that the church that we build is like a city on the hill that people look at and think, this is what I want to be part of, and this is where I belong.
So what is unconscious bias? By definition, unconscious bias isn't something you deliberately think about, but rather something you absorb. Your parents, families, and friends all impact what you think. What you watch, experience, and read, and engage with will shape your opinions and viewpoints. You then are the sum of many, many influences. Most of them will be very positive and make you the person that you are. However, often unconsciously, we can take on less positive viewpoints, practices, and opinions. So think of your brain as moving in two speeds. There's a slow thinking. This is where you consciously stop and evaluate what you're thinking and why, and you're coming to a well thought through response. So you need patience and concentration, and you need to analytically think things through and reason things out. It's a real effort and costly in terms of time and energy. In terms of fast thinking, this is where you react speedily and immediately. It's where you involuntarily react and emotionally respond to what's before you. It's easy because it's quick. So you need both to be working well, because there's no point in overthinking your response when the lion is about to attack you. And the problem is that with unconscious bias, often we think quickly to something that if we just took our time, we would make a better response. So when at coffee time, after a service, we can choose to talk to the white person in a group we know well, or the black person on their own. Instinct may tell us to gravitate towards the white group. So what is the impact of unconscious bias? Well, you might remember some of the things that were said in the video. I too am C of E. Exclusion and isolation are difficult for people to deal with emotionally. You will at some point have been excluded yourself. Just remember how it felt. I want to talk briefly about confirmation bias and affinity bias. So what is confirmation bias? Well, it's where we seek to confirm what we already believe and ignore contradictory evidence. So the sum of all that we are, that has been shaped by our upbringing and experiences, makes us believe certain things that may not necessarily be true. You get this with stereotypes that people are given. For years, I heard comments like, "Women are too emotional to make good priests." We know such a stereotype is nonsense, and yet unconsciously some still believe that. That can have an impact on recruitment. We don't want to have such and such a person here, because whatever the stereotype might be. It can impact performance management. So when assessing performance, you start not with a level playing field, but rather you're looking for evidence to confirm your inbuilt bias. It means a person will never get anything right. It can affect sponsorship, by which I mean you might support for a particular role. Why is it that most treasurers are men? Most organists are men? Most Sunday school teachers are women? Or why is it that whilst many of our churches have black congregation members, very few of them get asked to sit on the PCC? Affinity bias. So this is where people gravitate to a particular group. We all do it. We look for people that look like us or who seem to share our characteristics, or those who look like the sort of people that share our values, or the people who look like they can be trusted. That's normal, but think how that might impact recruitment. Do you only go for those who seem similar to us? Networking. This, of course, is an issue you see clearly on social media, where we gravitate towards people who seem to hold the same views as us. So we never emerge from our own information bubble to be challenged. Mentoring and support, where you just choose to be challenged by people who essentially agree with you. Delegation, so you only pass on responsibilities to people who will do the things in the same way as you. Appraisal, you only ever agree to be monitored by people who will agree with your way of working, and so you never address any bias that may be within you. I would suggest that this isn't actually a healthy way of operating, because we should always allow ourselves to be challenged about our views and actions. So what does all of this lead to? Well, it leads to in-groups and out-groups. The result of confirmation bias and affinity bias is that you can develop in-groups and out-groups. The danger of this within church and community work is, I hope, obvious. Those who don't share your viewpoint immediately become the other, the people who aren't trusted, who are too easily judged, who aren't supported, and so on, and not chosen for responsibility. So let's make sure we reflect on these questions here. Take your time to answer them properly. Where do you see in-groups and out-groups within your church? How do you know if you're part of the in-group or the out-group? What specific behaviours do you notice in yourself or others when this happens? Take a moment to pause. There are ways in which we can minimise unconscious bias. We need to slow down, so think before you say something you might regret. Use role models, find people who change the model of PCC member / warden, etc. Get to know people as individuals. Talking and learning about other people destroys stereotyping. Take a perspective, step back and ask yourself honest questions about how you react. Have contact. Go out your way to develop contact with people who wouldn't be in your in-group. Get tested. Ask people honestly about whether you have unconscious bias. Find super categories, that is, stop pigeonholing people. They are not black Christians, they are Christians who happen to be black. You're not dealing with a disabled priest, but a priest who happens to have additional needs to do their job. Get in there first. Don't wait for someone else to make the first move. You do it. Avoid reinforcement. Don't let people get away with saying something that reinforces stereotyping. Have a look at these statements. They are all actual statements that people have made. What thoughts do they evoke in you? Which apply and which don't to your context? Do the statements make you think, we're nearly there, or we have miles to travel? Pause the video here to give yourself time to think. So what next? What steps do you think you need to take? Are there particular issues that need addressing? Who will take the lead in making this happen? How about running the difference course? I can vouch that the difference course is exceptional. It teaches you to be curious instead of being afraid of people, to be present, and to reimagine situations. So perhaps that could be your next big step. Thank you so much for going through this unconscious bias training video. If you have any questions or need anything clarifying, please feel free to contact Nadine, www.wright@chester.anglican.org. For any follow-ups or clarification, please feel free to give me a call on the number provided below. Thank you. Bye.